These people aren't like fascists. They are fascists.
The modern Republican Party doesn't give a damn about democracy. It's rapidly becoming, well, let's not mince words. It's becoming the American Fascist Party.
The modern Republican Party is a fascistic, authoritarian party.
Now, Republicans are ugly, they're immoral, and they're fascist.
Let's talk about that. Hello everyone and welcome back to The Filthy Centrist. I'm your host Chris, and today there's a topic I want to cover that I feel is growing increasingly relevant and increasingly annoying within modern American political discourse. If you're at all immersed or involved in this sort of thing, this is certainly something that you will likely have noticed, and if you are like me, it is something that you will have grown increasingly frustrated by. As the intro may have suggested to you, I am of course talking about the growing tendency within American political discourse, both in real life and online, to label or associate the side you oppose with some widely disliked or generally considered to be evil historical ideology or regime. Despite its recent growth and prevalence, it in a lot of ways is not a new phenomenon. Stuff like this can be traced all the way back to the Cold War in America, where right-wing groups especially would whip up fear campaigns, red scares of any ideology that was left of center on the economic scale and brand it as some evil communism, like to that seen in the Soviet Union. While that specific buzzword is not gone, especially among right-wing groups, it is by and large not a predominant buzzword used in modern American political conversation. Today, the much more common buzzword or term that you hear to label people who you disagree with or oppose is the buzzword fascist or far right, interchangeably. This of course is especially used by people on the political left to demonize and dehumanize those on the right. Now of course that's not to say that it is purely or even predominantly out of an insidious nature or insidious motive. Oftentimes it is also likely that they truly believe that certain right-wing groups are indeed fascist. That's also not to say that these groups are entirely wrong oftentimes. Sometimes these groups could be using these labels quite accurately. Furthermore, it's good to call it extremism when it actually exists, and I am by no means suggesting that when actual fascism or far-right extremism presents itself that we should avoid calling out of fear of potentially being wrong. But I also believe it's important to identify what groups are actually fascistic or extremist, because if we do not properly label what we oppose, then we do not understand what we oppose. And we run the risk of dividing ourselves unnecessarily, putting ourselves at odds with people who we might not actually be that different from. Now, in modern American politics, the most common use of this buzzword in reference to an opposing group would be by people on the political left accusing people who are socially conservative, and specifically members of the Republican Party, of being fascist or fascistic. So you do get the odd argument from conservative figures arguing that figures like Mussolini, Hitler, or other far-right figures in history were, for some reason, far left. And because of that fact, or what they believe to be that fact, the modern political left is closer to being fascist than those they accuse of being fascists. Now that, of course, is kind of a ridiculous argument, but it's not really what I want to cover in this video. What I do want to try and cover is try and get to the bottom of whether or not the primary claim that I've tried to bring up is in fact accurate. That claim, of course, being that the Republican Party, or at least the MAGA movement associated with it, is in some way fascist or fascistic. Because if that is indeed an accurate statement, that is very, very serious. And it is something that moderates or even conservatives who have voted for the Republican Party in the past should seriously consider. And if it's not accurate, well, I think it's important to reevaluate and examine why we use this word, or at least why some people use it, and try to understand how we can try and fix how our political discourse has become like this. So strap in, grab some snacks, get your pet to sit with you maybe, and let's try and figure out if the Republican Party is actually fascist. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. I'm sorry. Back to the video. So there are 4 key elements of any kind of fascism, or at least 4 key ideas that coincide with any kind of fascist movement. I have derived these 4 criteria from various self-described fascists who have written about their ideology historically, the various fascist regimes that have been reserved historically, and various associated regimes that have also been identified as fascistic in some way. Fortunately for me, literally nobody agrees on what fascism actually is, or at least the definition of it, so I'm going to do my best to stick to these 4 criteria based on historical sources and general academic definitions of what fascism is. People are going to hate me for it regardless, so might as well just get into it. Criteria number 1, totalitarianism or authoritarianism. This is a universal aspect of any fascist ideology, and it is indisputable and inseparable from the ideology. The submission of the individual to the state. Of course, not unique to fascism, but you cannot separate authoritarianism and totalitarianism from fascism. Criteria number 2, a variable economy subservient to the state. Unlike the previous point, this is especially a point where things get heated in disagreement about what fascism is. Some argue that fascism is a socialist left-wing ideology economically, and some argue it is a capitalist ideology. The truth is, in this case, as with most things, far more complicated and nuanced. Across the board, there has been no specific economic ideology followed by fascist regimes. Some, like in Mussolini's Italy, followed a form of national syndicalism, a type of nationalist socialism. Others, like Pinochet's Chile, followed a kind of free market economy backed up by a fascist state. Still others, like in Hitler's Germany, there were factions of the Nazi Party that supported a Marxist economics mixed with Nazi ideology. There isn't really one economic ideology, left or right, to connect fascism or Nazism to. There's only one real consistency that we can draw from across all regimes that have been labeled as fascist or fascistic: an economy loyal to the state. Left, right, or center, if the economy did not serve the interests of the state, first and foremost, that was not an economy for the fascists. Nationalism is a key part of any fascist movement. Arguably, it's the most globally well-known part of fascism. An extreme or radical devotion to one's nation to such an extreme point that you seek to actively dominate other nation-states. This normally manifests itself as a kind of extreme cultural nationalism, though in some cases, such as in Hitler's Germany, it can have a racial aspect as well, though this is not a requirement for fascism. At times, it can be an economic domination, but more often than not, it is a political, territorial domination over a lesser nation-state. Now, even if you think fascism is an universally economically left-wing ideology, there is no denying whatsoever that fascism is a socially very right-wing ideology. Quite literally, every single fascist or neo-fascist ideology, from Hitler to Mussolini to Franco to the Romanian Legionary movement, all the way up to modern movements like the Patriot Front in the US or Atomwaffen Division. All of these movements universally advocated or advocate for a strict adherence to right-wing, socially conservative, cultural and social values. Everything from an opposition to homosexuality, traditional family structures, traditional gender roles, and more. And of course, all of these rules, roles, and expectations were enforced, again, very stringently by the totalitarian state. So, Here are our 4 elements of fascism. Number 1, totalitarianism and authoritarianism. Number 2, a varied economy loyal to the state. Number 3, radical nationalism. Number 4, staunch right-wing social and cultural policy. So, based on this criteria that we've gone through, is the Republican Party a fascist party? Well, let's go through it one by one, both looking at what the party says they believe and what they actually take action on, because sometimes those are 2 different things. So first, authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Is that what the GOP actually believes? Officially, no on both counts. In their official party platform that they most recently published, along with all the rhetoric and official statements coming from party members, the Republican Party is staunchly in support of democracy, freedom, and the United States' specific Republican system. As for party actions, however, I would still say yes, but it's complicated. While the GOP seemingly does support democracy, there have been recent actions taken by the party, especially since the 2020 election, that have really damaged that credibility on their part. The most notable of such events would be the illegal storming of the Capitol on January 6, 2021. While the action itself was not officially supported by the GOP, many members of the GOP, both at the time and today, have gone to great lengths to defend those rioters, and the riot itself was arguably stirred up by the words of President Donald Trump. And while you could argue that party members in higher ranks may have advocated for some kind of authoritarian action there, in regards to disregarding the democratic elections, the truth is that I don't believe it to be reflective of a broader authoritarian movement within the GOP. Most protesters there had been lied to by party leadership, believing that they were in fact defending democracy rather than opposing it. And while I do think that says something concerning about GOP party leadership at this time, I do not believe it is reflective of broader authoritarianism within the party. And I also do think it is somewhat concerning that those same GOP members and voters continue to support such party leadership. Only time will tell, I guess. We'll see what happens in 2024. And as for voter ID, I remain unconvinced that it is reflective of authoritarianism, even if you disagree with the policy itself. Alright, let's move on to number 2. A variable economy loyal to the state. On pretty much all accounts, this is a resounding no. The Republican Party has always advocated for a free market economy with low regulation, low taxes, low spending, a promotion of business interests, economic growth, etc. They by no means are advocating for a strong economy loyal only to the state. Number 3, nationalism. Is the GOP a nationalist party? Well, officially, yeah, kinda they are. They have a party platform that advocates for patriotism, promoting American values and keeping America a strong country that we can all be proud of. Unofficially, this is even more true to an even further extent, especially since the election of figures like Donald Trump. American nationalism has become an integral part of the MAGA movement and the Republican Party. An opposition to immigration stems from this new types of nationalism, along with various elements of American patriotism that weren't previous major focuses of the Republican Party, even as those people within America did exist. Although an important distinction is that the Republican Party, despite being very nationalist, is not a chauvinistic party. It does not seek to dominate other nation states, and in recent years has in fact grown more isolationist. So, while the answer is yes on both counts, it is a leaning yes, a moderate yes, similar to how the first answer was a more leaning no, a more moderate no. Finally, number 4, staunch right-wing social and cultural policy. Now this is yet another easy double yes. The Republican Party has always been a socially conservative party, or at least since the days of Reagan. It's been a socially conservative party advocating for traditional marriage values, an opposition to the expansion of LGBT rights, a promotion of Christian values, prayer in schools, an opposition to abortion and stuff like that. It is very much a staunch right-wing socially conservative party. With our 4 criteria in mind, is the Republican Party a fascist or fascistic party? No, not really. It is certainly a staunchly conservative and nationalist party, but fascist, by all conventional or academic definitions, it is not a fascist party. The Republican Party may advocate for things that you hate or strongly disagree with. I mean, There are many things that I strongly dislike and strongly disagree with the Republican Party on, especially in recent times. That doesn't mean you can go label it as something it's not without fully researching what the thing you're talking about is. Because then, the buzzword you're using, in this case fascism, loses its meaning. And when actual fascism arises, like we can see fascism today, there are real fascist groups who are still active, it cheapens the word, and you will get your average conservative or moderate who hears this buzzword being used to reference conservatives to not take these groups seriously. That's a big problem, because then you lose conservative support, which normally historically has opposed fascism, and they will ignore it because they think you're being ridiculous, or you're using the word incorrectly. It's okay to hate conservatism. It's okay to strongly disagree with it. It's okay to think you want nothing to do with it. But don't mislabel it just because you don't like it. It's harmful, and it's generally intellectually very dishonest. Fascism is an ideology that most people consider to be, quite an awful, evil ideology. It's done a lot of harm and hurt a lot of people historically. And so I want to close with this. There's a good chance, if you really consider it, that your average conservative who votes for the Republican Party is not some evil fascist who wants to take away your rights. Ultimately, they're a normal person like you, who probably has somewhat reasonable reasons for thinking the way they think. Even if you completely think those reasons are dog shit. And you might say, well, that doesn't justify them voting for a party that does all this awful stuff. Well, maybe you're right, but do you think you're going to change their mind by yelling at them? Trust me, you're not. As much as conservatives will probably vote for the Republican Party either way, it is still the opinion of Republican voters that changes the policy that the politicians push. And right now, they are pushing for a very staunch, right-wing nationalist ideology. And if you want to change that, the best way to do that is to talk to them. Not use buzzwords, don't yell at them, don't call them evil or demonize them. Just have a conversation with a conservative. Completely in good faith, I challenge you. Have a conversation with a conservative. Be respectful. Ask them why they believe what they believe. Maybe y'all can have a conversation, learn something about each other. Ask them not just about their politics, but about their personal life. Learn about who they are as a person, and what has led them to think the way they do. It might give you a better appreciation of people in general, and how people come to think what they think. But it also might convince them that maybe these liberals or moderates aren't so bad, and maybe they have something good to say. If we could do stuff like that on all sides of politics more and more, I guarantee you political discourse would be a lot better than it is today. And in the case of those who oppose the Republican Party, maybe the message of the party might be moderated then, with conservatives who don't think so stringently that the left is evil. Remember, dialogue is almost always better than screaming and yelling. No one has ever been convinced that they were wrong by having a brick thrown in their face. I just want to leave you with that. I hope the next time you talk to a conservative or a liberal or a moderate, wherever you stand on the political spectrum, just remember, they're people too. Talk to them. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.